because there was no doubt about it. He'd been cruel both in junior high and the day before. What did he get from that? Did it make him feel better about himself? He tried to remember something useful from his Psych 201 lectures. Was it mirroring? No. That was when you acted like someone else. Was it projecting? No. Wasn't that putting your feelings off on someone else? Displacement? Getting closer. That was taking out your frustrations and impulses on someone or something less threatening than what's bothering you. Threatening. I meant threatening. I said it like threatening. Ah, he might be onto something. But he was so tired. Noel's eyes closed, and finally he fell asleep. A screeching squeal somewhere between an alarm's buzz and a siren's wail, a sound that barely came in under ear-damaging levels, wrenched Noel from cushy oblivion and hurled him back toward Earth. At the same time, a spine-scouring lightning strike burned an image of the Blackbird into Noel's brain, marking Noel's mind like a dreadful brand. Noel fought to find his way back to full consciousness, but he couldn't get all the way there. He was awake enough to know he'd been dragged from sleep, but that was as far as he could go. It was like something was holding him in place, clamping him into restraints in a way station between thought and no thought. He felt literally pinned to the bed. He could even feel the stabbing pressure of something sharp digging into his skin at the wrist and ankles. He tried to buck off his assailant, but he couldn't move at all. He was utterly paralyzed. He could feel the pressure getting stronger and stronger, pushing him deeper into his mattress. He felt like he was being compressed into nothingness. And still, he tried to battle the force above him. He poured every ounce of his will into his muscles, and he grunted and strained to get free. His confinement got worse, not better. Noel suddenly sensed an evil presence hovering over him. No, not hovering, sitting. The presence was sitting on Noel's bed. Sitting on Noel. It was pressing down on him, engulfing him, insinuating. Sorry, I read it as insulating. Engulfing him, insinuating itself into every part of him. And then, with a flash of light, he was free. He busted loose from his bizarre captivity and awoke so fully that when he opened his eyes, he was completely alert and he had his bat in his hands. That was a good thing, because Noel was not alone in his room. A demonic presence of tenebrous feathers were poised right above his head. So Noel swung his bat. In the nanosecond he swung, or was it the nanosecond before he swung, the thing above Noel's bed disappeared in an eruption of feathers that spewed throughout the room. Then the feathers vanished into nothingness. It happened so fast, Noel couldn't be sure it happened at all. All he could be sure of, though, was that he did swing his bat. He knew this because his lamp hit the floor, and another bulb bit the dust. The time span in which Noel had seen the feathered thing was infinitesimal. Wow, there's so many big words. Infinitesimal. There we go. I do know that word, but it's hard to say when you're just hit with it. Get it? Hit with it. It wasn't even a second. Noel's room went from sound and havoc to utter silence and stillness in the blink of an eye. And yet, the image of what Noel had seen in that blink was burned onto his retinas, because he hadn't just seen feathers, he'd also seen soul drilling, malevolent yellow eyes, and a pointed, threatening beak. Those eyes had locked on to Noel's eyes. The sharp beak had aimed itself right at Noel's guilty heart. Noel was sure it was the Blackbird, leaning over him with malicious intent. This wasn't just a still shot. This was a complete horror film playing out behind his eyeballs in the theatre of his own mind. That's a very nice metaphor. Without blood. Sam was right. You didn't need blood to have horror. The creep factor was horrific enough. Noel emitted a sound that was half moan and half laugh. It sounded like the strangled sob of an unhinged man. How strange that in just a few hours, Noel had gone from a well-adjusted college guy to a paranoid mental case. Because he had to be crazy, right? To believe the horror that he and Sam had grafted on the fly had come to life? Noel stood and paced around the room. Adrenaline was still coursing through his system, and he needed to get it out. After 3 U-shaped passes back and forth around his bed, Noel decided one thing. His room was not big enough for his nervous energy, so Noel strode into his closet and grabbed sweats, a t-shirt, a hoodie, socks, and running shoes. By the time Noel stepped into the bright hall, it was eerily silent in the frat house. He checked his watch again. It was almost 1 a.m. Wait a second, where did the last hour and a half go? Had Noel lain in bed thinking about psychology for that long, or had he been in that incapacitated incapacitated, there we go. Sometimes you need to break down the word. Incapacitated state longer than he thought. I have no idea what that means, honestly. I apologize again. He had no idea. The hammering of his heart was drowning out any rational thought at the moment. Striding down the hall as quietly as possible, Noel darted to the stairs and ran down them without a sound. It wasn't that he cared about waking up his frat brothers. He didn't want to have to explain to anyone what he was doing. He just wanted to get away. As soon as he stepped through the heavy double doors and onto the broad front porch of the frat house, Noel rethought his actions. Did he really want to go running in the dark with this creature hounding him? What if the thing got tired of toying with him and decided to grab him? What if it seized him and took off the way an eagle snatched a rodent? Now that did sound insane. Did he really think the Blackbird was going to fly over and steal him from the ground? Even if some frightful rendition of Sam in his costume was coming after Noel, that didn't mean it could fly, did it? Why not? If any of what happened today was possible, then anything is possible. Noel turned and ran back up to his room. He spent the next 2 hours trying to stay awake. He was too terrified to try and sleep again, so he did push-ups and sit-ups. He listened to music. He played games on his computer. Finally, he started watching a movie. The movie was what did him in. He had to close his laptop, and sleep overpowered him. As soon as Noel closed his eyes, the high-pitched caterwauling sound started again. He tried to cover his ears, but again, he was paralyzed. Every time he tried to writhe against whatever force held him down, he had to push through the horror that still played in his head, the brutal eyes gazing into the murk of his very essence, the beak like a scythe of judgment cutting through his heart. Oh, I love that. I love this. He's using, or the writer is using very good metaphors and stuff. I like this a lot. In his benumbed consciousness, inky feathered shapes streaked toward him, then retreated over and over. He felt like a fat, helpless worm inching through the dirt. The Blackbird was merely playing with him before plucking him from the ground and swallowing him whole. The sound and the image were tearing him apart from the inside, and he still fought. Still, he was held in place, until he wasn't. As before, Noel came back into the land of the living, with a crack of radiant light and a gaping silence. As before, he was on his feet immediately. And as before, the evil trespasser disintegrated into oblivion, as if it was never there. Which it clearly wasn't, even though every iota of Noel's being was arguing that it was. Noel was going to lose his mind if he didn't get out of this room. Once again, Noel opened his door and headed through the frat house. This time, when he got to the porch, he didn't let himself think. He just took off running down the brick path leading toward the quad. He had to get away, and that meant running. The campus was dead still. Noel couldn't even hear a car in the distance. He wouldn't have been surprised to find out that the campus had been isolated under a glass dome. But no, it was still in the real world. It seemed to be a perfectly normal campus, hanging out on Earth. The night sky was black. Clouds must have blown in. Bushes gyrated in a breeze that hadn't been blowing for a few hours before. An occasional torn poster or candy bar wrapper skittered over the bricks. The campus was lit by a series of iron lampposts, which cast a mesh. Oh my gosh, a mesh. I don't have a lisp, I swear. Iron lampposts, which cast a mesh of shadow and light over the concrete and foliage. Noel found it mildly disorienting to look at. He seemed to see a feather in every blade of grass or errant branch. So Noel kept his gaze directed at a spot on the ground 15 or so feet in front of him to try and keep his focus and also center his thoughts. He'd been running as fast as he could, as if running for his life. He might have been running for his life. Something was torturing him, relentlessly. How could he escape it? For now, he'd run. Noel turned to look behind him, and his shoe caught a tree root. He tumbled off the path into the bushes, lying on his back, holding a twisted ankle and wincing at the sharp pain that suggested he'd skinned his knees and elbows. Noel threw his head back and shouted, "Enough!" He closed his eyes, and the horrendous sounds started again. The chilling, feathered entity loomed over him. Noel opened his eyes, and of course, he was alone. Noel fought his way out of the bushes, thrashing to his feet. Ignoring the throbbing pain in too many places to catalogue, Noel said, "Sam, I'm sorry." Turning in a circle, Noel said it again and again, almost like a ritual. "Sam, I'm sorry." Quarter turn. "Sam, I'm sorry." Quarter turn. "Sam, I'm sorry." Closing his eyes for a fraction of a second, Noel confirmed what he suspected, that his apologies weren't accomplishing anything at all. But he tried one more time. He threw his arms up to the sky and bellowed, "Sam, I'm sorry." This got a response. It got him a blinding flashlight beam in the face and a campus cop's, "Are you drunk or high?" Noel rolled his eyes and faced the guy. He had dark skin and closely cropped hair. An unimpressive badge was clipped to his belt. "Neither," he said. "I was having nightmares, so I went for a run." The campus cop shined his light from Noel's feet to the top of his head. Noel held his arms out away from his body, hands open to show he carried nothing. "What's your name?" The cop put the light back in Noel's eyes. Noel squinted and looked away, frowning at the spots that cavorted across his retinas. But hey, maybe if he was blind, he wouldn't be able to see that blackbird. Even thinking the name made the image reassert itself. "Name?" the cop repeated. "Noel Markham. Could you please not shine that right in my eyes?" The cop lowered the flashlight beam. Noel couldn't see the cop's face very well, but he didn't look much older than Noel himself. He was much taller than Noel, though, and the way he loomed over the scene reminded Noel of... "Stop it!" he commanded himself. "Why are you yelling?" the cop asked. "I was trying to get something out of my system." The cop whipped the light back into Noel's eyes. "Drugs? No, I'm not high. I'm not drunk. He hesitated. "I did something to piss off a friend, and he's mad at me. I was just... I don't know." The campus cop lowered the flashlight again. For a few minutes they stood in silence. Noel noticed crickets chirping, which he hadn't heard while he was running. Then the campus cop surprised him. He said, "I get that. You want to say you're sorry, but you're a little pissed that he's so pissed, so you're yelling that you're sorry to get that anger out of your system." Noel lifted an eyebrow. "Not bad for a campus cop." "That's exactly right," he said. "Okay, well, do you think you're done yelling?" Noel nodded. "I can be, yes." "Okay." Noel waited to be sure the guy was done with him. The cop gestured down the path with his flashlight. "I suggest you keep running. It's a great way to get stuff out of your system." "Yeah, thanks." They nodded at each other, and Noel headed off again. By the time he'd run a mile, the barest hint of pale pink was touching the top of the hills at the east edge of town. Dawn was coming, and Noel hadn't really slept at all. Was he ever going to sleep again? He had to let Sam know he was sorry, some other way than by screaming in the middle of the campus. But how? Noel was running back toward his frat house when he heard footfalls approaching from the left. Slowing, trying not to quake in fear, Noel glanced in the direction of the footfalls. He tried to tell himself it sounded like a person, not a bird, and he was right. "Noel!" For the first time in hours, Noel relaxed. He didn't relax completely, but he let go of his anxiety to unkink the muscles in his neck and shoulders. Hi, Amber. Amber jogged in place right in front of him. Wearing dark blue sweats and a white t-shirt, she was just starting to work up a sheen of sweat. I've never seen you running in the morning before, Amber said. I don't run in the morning. Ah, so this must be another one of your clones? Noel smiled, and when he realized how good it felt to smile, he smiled wider. Yes. How many do you have? As many as I need for the things I don't do. Amber laughed. Do you want to run with me, Noel's clone? Sure. Why not? Sam wasn't ready, not even a little, to face his day. He still hadn't come to terms with his night. When they finished running, they ended up at the cafeteria again. We have to stop meeting like this. Amber used the hem of her shirt to wipe sweat from her face. I've never met you here before, he said. That was Noel's other clone. Oh, right, I forgot. The cafeteria doors were just opening. An enticing bacon aroma wafted out through the double doors. Only a few bleary-eyed students were starting to straggle toward the building. Amber put her foot up on the railing alongside the stairs and bent over to stretch. Noel felt sweat trickling down his spine. He closed his eyes for a second and then immediately opened them wide to try and wake himself up. Then he wiped his eyes. They were dry and scratchy. Are you okay? Amber asked. I mean, seriously, you don't look too good. Well, thanks. Amber gave him a half smile. You know what I mean. Your eyes are really red. I haven't slept. All night? Noel shook his head. Anything I can do? Noel studied her. It was funny. Just now, he realized she reminded him a little of Christine, the girl he'd bullied in junior high. She had similar coloring and her mouth was the same shape. He wondered if that's why he'd never thought of her as pretty until recently. Amber had been in several of his classes both the previous year and this one, and he'd never given her a second glance until a couple days before. Now he realized he liked her a lot. With like came trust, so he blurted, How would you fix it if you did something really wrong? And it was a long time ago, but then you did it again recently and you can't apologize to the person you did it to, but you're sorry and you want to make amends somehow. Amber tilted her head and pursed her lips. Guilt is keeping you awake? Something like that. Amber sat on one of the concrete steps and patted the space next to her. Noel acknowledged a greeting from a friend and sat next to Amber. The concrete was cold and damp. It's nice that you feel guilt. It shows character. A lot of guys are too stupid to know when they should feel guilty. I might have thought you were one of those. So why did you want to go out with me? I might have thought I was wrong. Noel wasn't so sure she was. Did he feel guilty because he had character or because he didn't want to be murdered by the Blackbird? I think guilt is like a weed. Amber lifted her face to the sun, which was starting to climb above the tops of the trees. It's best to pluck it out at the root. So apologize to the first person. The first person I need to apologize to, Noel said. But how does that make amends with the second person? Amber said, It's an energy thing. Yin and yang. Balance the scales in one place and the balance radiates outwards. Noel wasn't so sure about that, but he had to do something. There you are. Noel turned at the sound of the girl's voice. It was Darla and their friend group. She pointed at Amber and said, You weren't where we always meet. Amber jumped up. Sorry, it's his fault. She pointed at Noel and grinned. He stood too. I need a shower. Amber nodded and headed toward her friends. She turned back. Good luck. Thanks. He knew he was going to need it. How in the world was he going to find Christine Wilbur? Oh, wait. Wait, this isn't like a big prank or something, is it? It isn't like Christine getting her own back or something. Oh, that would be... Oh. Prediction. How in the world was he going to find Christine Wilbur? Noel contemplated this question during his much-needed shower, and when he got back in his room, and when he stood at his window, watching people head to class. He'd already decided he was skipping all classes for the day. Now he grabbed his laptop and prepared to find Christine. Looking at his bed longingly, Noel took his laptop to his desk. He was afraid if he even sat in bed, he'd start to fall asleep. A quick internet search hadn't helped. Christine Wilbur wasn't coming up on any searches. She apparently didn't do social media, and she hadn't done anything significant enough to get on a search engine's radar. So how could he find her? A couple of Noel's frat brothers had been talking about Sam when Noel had returned to the frat house. Sam was still missing, so finding Christine was the only way for him to be safe again. Or was he just coming unhinged? What if the previous night had only been some simple sleep disorder caused by the shock of the day's news? He no longer felt like he was in shock, so maybe if he tried to sleep now, he'd be okay. He hadn't seen any dark shadows or glimpses of big birds on his way back to the frat house. That was a good sign, wasn't it? Noel closed his eyes just briefly and felt like he could fall asleep sitting up. Okay, that was it. He was going to lie down and go to sleep and forget all about Christine Wilbur and Sam and the Blackbird. Since the only injuries he'd sustained in the harrowing hours of the long night were ones he caused himself, he had to conclude that the threat was in his head. And if it was in his head, he could darn well beat it. Resolved, he set aside his laptop and got into bed. Fully dressed in jeans and a white t-shirt, he sighed, stretching out. He put his head on the pillow, closed his eyes, and sleep took him right into hell. Ooh, I like that. I like that sentence. That really short, simple sentence. I like that. Right into hell. Ooh. The second Noel's brainwaves slowed, the Blackbird appeared in a dissonant din of keening and buzzing that was so intense it felt like a physical invasion boring into Noel's ear canal. Diabolical wings leaned over Noel menacingly, aiming its beak directly at Noel's right eye. The Blackbird bent even closer. Noel knew his eye was closed because he was asleep, but in the dream world, his eyes were open to see the beak move lower and lower. At the same time, the weight ramming down on him got heavier and heavier. Noel's chest was being crushed under the feathered mass. Even though he knew it would do no good, Noel wriggled and jerked himself back and forth, trying to throw off the hideous creature. He concentrated on trying to free his legs, but that just made things worse. His legs started to spasm, and it felt like someone was trying to tear them off his body. The pain in his limbs was excruciating. The sound morphed too. The high-pitched tones abated, only to be replaced by a combination of crackling static and a loud hum, interrupted at regular intervals by a deafening zap sound that reminded Noel of the electric bug zappers his grandfather kept by his back deck. Only this zap was not designed for mosquitoes. It was tuned to something the size of a pterodactyl. Noel realized that he could no longer breathe. Sorry, that line is just funny. The weight on his chest was flattening his lungs and stopping his heart. He felt like he was being dragged into some other realm, the Blackbird's realm. And as he left his world, the world he realized he had taken for granted all his life, his body began to tingle. The tingle sped up, and they became vibrations so fast and powerful, it felt like every cell in his body was palpitating at a jackhammer pace. Faster and faster, his body vibrated, and it began to emit a droning sound. Brrr. What? Noel tried to scream, but he couldn't even use his mouth. He realized he couldn't even feel his mouth or the rest of his body. He wasn't just paralyzed, he was numb. And that was left of Noel. All that was left of Noel was his consciousness. His mind was still functioning fine. In fact, it was functioning too well. It was giving him a relentless rundown on the system-wide failure of his body. Noel's existence receded further and further into an inky, feathered oblivion. The noise crescendoed. Oh my gosh, crescendoed. The pain intensified. Noel was sure he was on the verge of total annihilation. And then it all stopped. Except for a vise grip on his arm, an annoying jostling of his shoulder, and the sound of someone yelling, "Dude!" Noel opened his eyes. Ian let go of his arm and shoulder and backed away from the bed. "Dude," he repeated, but at a low volume. Noel realised he was bathed in sweat. His skin felt clammy and his clothes stuck to him. He ached all over. Are you okay? Ian asked. Noel couldn't answer that question, so he just shook his head and then nodded. That should clear things up. Ian, wearing only red boxer shorts covered with charging bulls, dropped into Noel's desk chair. Noel looked at him. He'd never seen the big guy look so shook up. He'd never seen Ian in his room before either. They only hung out when other frat brothers were around, usually in the main lounge downstairs. How'd you get in here? Noel asked. Ian blinked, then twisted his mouth in a guilty little kid way. Oh, I sort of broke your door. Noel looked over to see his door jamb splintered and his door hanging on one hinge. Sorry, Ian said. I thought you were dying. Noel returned his gaze to Ian and raised an eyebrow. I've never heard anyone make a sound like that, dude, Ian said. It was loud, but really low, like grunting, sort of like you were trying to oh my gosh. It was loud, but really low. We're going to try this again. It was loud, but really low, like grunting, sort of. Like you were trying like crazy to scream, but someone had their hand over your mouth. There we go. and there were all these thuds and thumps. I thought someone was trying to kill you.